Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she's not stopped kissing my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven." And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Luke 7:44-50. May God add his blessing to the reading, hearing, understanding, and living of Scripture. Thanks be to God. Good morning, church, and welcome to our time together of word, message, and prayer. And welcome, too, to our third Sunday of Lent, this time of quiet reflection, prayer, and meditation, as we spend intentional time honing our spiritual practices that enable us to meet God in the deep waters and experience his deep grace. I've loved this series, anchored in such beautiful imagery from Psalm 42:7, which reads, "Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. All your waves and breakers have swept over me." Deep calls to deep. I love that. God's call of us to meet him in these deep waters, to be rescued, refreshed, and reborn. And with that, we continue today to look at our own deep waters, those places where Jesus encourages us to jump during good times, but also reminds us that he's with us when our waters are troubled too. Those ebbs and flows of life, the cycling of our seasons, times when we struggle to understand why our lives are going in a certain direction that we hadn't anticipated, or times when we think there is something wrong with us, not realizing that God is actually doing something greater. And even now, during this time when the world around us seems so surreal, impossible to imagine even, and incredibly scary. For many of us, this is a season of having to dig deeper into God than ever before to help us through these tumultuous waters as we seek assurance and hope that all will be okay. And that is what we see in our story today as we hear of Jesus, who's reclined at the table in a Pharisee's home where he was invited to dinner. I mean, from the very start of this story, Jesus is kind of jumping into deep water, as Pharisees at this time were an interesting bunch. They were a party of men who emerged largely out of the group of scribes and sages of the day, and they cared deeply about God. And they were also always on the lookout for the Messiah. They were looking for the Messiah and for God to keep his promises of forgiveness and restoration of Israel. Their name, Pharisees, comes from the Hebrew and Aramaic parush or parushi, which means one who is separated. And they were guys who went the extra mile to obedience of the laws of Moses. And so this name may refer to their separation from the Gentiles, sources of ritual and purity from the irreligious Jews, if you will. But we do know they were not aligned with Jesus, or really anyone. And so for Jesus to accept this invitation was him jumping into potential troubled waters. But Jesus does accept. And as was the norm, he was at the table leaning back against the pillows, which were on the floor. It was their custom also to invite people to watch, as people wanted to hear what he had to say, and they wanted to get a sense of who he was and what he was like. It was kind of like if you wanted to go experience the life of a movie star, for example, and you were invited to come and observe their dinner. It's kind of weird, I think, but then again, they didn't have Entertainment Tonight or TikTok to help keep them informed. And so people were invited to come in and observe. So this is where Jesus was when a woman out of the crowd steps out wearing an alabaster jar of expensive perfume around her neck. Likely the only thing she owned. And we also are told in the text that she had lived a sinful life. We don't know what that means, just that she lived a sinful life. Once out of the crowd, she went and stood behind Jesus where he was leaned back. And behind him, she began to weep at his feet. So much so that the tears from her face wet his feet. Her troubleness was told through these tears in her eyes. But when the Pharisee who had invited Jesus saw all of this play out, he said, if he, Jesus, knew who was touching him, this woman, she's a sinner. But Jesus, in his Jesus way, replies to Simon, I have something to tell you. That if two people were debtors, one who was in debt way over the top and another not quite so much, but both had their debts paid for, who would be the most grateful? Who would be the most thankful? Simon answers with, that's easy, the one who had the bigger debt. And Jesus responds with, yes, you are correct. You see, the thing is, this woman who came to Jesus that day was in a place of deep, deep water. She came that day to Jesus with troubled tears flowing from her eyes. And she came that day with her sacred oil and broke it open and anointed Jesus with all that she had, with love. It was her meeting Jesus in this place of vulnerability, a place of brokenness and shame, and she opened her heart to Jesus. She brought her raw self into the deep waters that day and left it all at the feet of Jesus, and experienced forgiveness like never before. You see, sometimes life is hard. I don't just mean when you're just having a rough day or when your spouse or your best friend forgets your birthday. I'm talking about that mind-wrenching, soul-searching, physically painful, deep, deep down to the core kind of being hard. The kind that comes with deep grief. Grief that paralyzes our bodies and our hearts. Or our tremendous regrets, the ones that we categorize at first as, no big deal. But then when we look at it truthfully, really are a very big deal. Also, too, are the sins that we've done to ourselves and others, the ones that hold us tighter and tighter until we simply can't breathe. That's the kind of hard I'm talking about. This is where our woman was in this story. She was in a place of fear and brokenness and hopelessness. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in a place where you were just in over your head, that it seemed like there was no one around, no one to go to, no idea what to do next? Paul tells us in Hebrews 4 that when we're at this place, that we're to approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. But how do we do this? Well, we begin with God, whose Spirit hovers about us like a bridge over troubled waters. And second, we hold fast to our faith, our trust in God. Perhaps we can lean into the ancient creeds, ancient words that tell us God is a living, active presence in our lives, and that we are forgiven, that we are promised new being and new life. You see, this is grace. God's grace, as God meets us in the deep waters of life. It's where we experience his deep love for us, his deep forgiveness, and his hopes and dreams for us. He's right there with us in our time of need, weakness, brokenness, and hardness, to relieve, empower, connect, and enable us to be who we are, children of God. Children who need to trust, to be in the same place of vulnerability with our hearts broken open and trust in the one who reverses things for many, who are first will be last, and the last will be first. And remember that for mortals it is impossible, but not for God. For God, all things are possible. This week, one of my favorite writers, Steve Charleston, had on his feed this: In even the deepest ocean, you can find the current, the unseen highway of water that moves beneath the surface. And even the most confusing times of our lives, we can find God's direction, moving unseen around us, just beneath the surface. We are never adrift in life. We're not forgotten or ignored, even when we're struggling to make sense of things, when we seem to have no control over our circumstances. There is a spiritual current that surrounds us, the power of the Spirit, drawing us towards healing and forgiveness and wisdom, the safe shore of love. Ride the current beneath you. Trust God to show you the way. I love that. To close today, I'm going to ask you to all think about something that is really, really troubling you. Perhaps a sin you're struggling with, or some deep grief or regret. And I ask that you hold it a moment in your mind's eye. Sit with it for a moment. And now, take a series of 3 deep breaths and take a listen. When you're weary, feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I will dry them. I'm on your side. Really, I am on your side. When times get rough and friends, they just can't be found, look around. Look around. I'm sailing right behind. I'm standing right beside. I'm hovering right above, like a bridge over troubled waters. I will ease your mind. Hovering like a bridge over troubled waters, I will ease your mind. For in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Amen. And that is a wrap, church. I will be in Portola at 10:30 this morning, and Pastor Ray will be leading worship in Quincy. I really, really hope you can make it. We haven't seen everybody come back since the beginning of COVID at either church, and so I ask you, how come? Know that your church misses you. Make today be the day that you do come back, and bring a friend. Also this week is breakfast with the pastor on Tuesday at 9 at the Griego Cafe, and on Wednesday morning at 7:30 in Quincy at Provisions. We had an amazing Bible study on Wednesday night, so know that you're still welcome to join us on Zoom at 6 o'clock. Also, both churches are resuming music now, and so if you'd like to sing, reach out to Alice and Christine, as I know they'd love to have more singers. So have a great week, church. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. It should be scrolling at your screen now. It's all my information, so feel free to reach out if I can help or answer any questions for you, or just be present. And so until next week, have a great week. Gentle winds.